But I've always written songs and recorded songs with other people's songs about working people and working life, because I mean, that's where I'm from. I mean, I work.
He's the voice that carried America through heartbreak, hope, and Sunday mornings on the front porch. For over 4 decades, Alan Jackson has stood tall, a humble legend whose songs spoke for everyone who ever loved, lost, or prayed for one more day. But now, at 67, the man who defined country music's golden sound is facing something even his strongest lyrics can't heal. The stage lights are dimming, the cowboy hat rests quietly, and his final words to fans will break your heart in ways you don't expect. What really happened to Alan Jackson, the boy from the shed? Before Alan Jackson ever stood beneath bright lights or sang to roaring crowds, his story began in the humblest of places, a wooden tool shed that his father turned into a home. In Noonan, Georgia, the air smelled of oil, sawdust, and biscuits baking on Sunday mornings. The Jackson family didn't have much: uneven floors, patched walls, and winters that crept through the cracks. But what they did have was love, faith, and the kind of resilience that only hardship can teach. Alan Eugene Jackson was the youngest of 5 children, the quiet boy who often slipped between the laughter of his older sisters. His father, Joseph "Daddy" Gene Jackson, worked long hours at the Ford Motor Company, his hands forever stained with grease and effort. His mother, Ruth, worked in the school cafeteria and led the family in prayer every night. When the pantry was low, she'd bow her head and whisper, "We may not have much, but we've got love, and that's plenty." It was in that tiny house, smaller than most people's garages, that Alan first learned the rhythm of life, the sound of rain tapping on tin roofs, the whistle of passing trains, and the ache of country songs drifting from an old radio. Hank Williams, Merle Haggard, and Gene Watson became his unseen teachers. He once said, "Those songs felt like they were written just for me, like someone out there understood what I couldn't say." By 12, childhood had already become work. He hauled lumber, fixed shoes, and stocked shelves, anything that put food on the table. Sweat became his teacher, silence his companion. He never complained. Instead, he dreamed, quietly, fiercely, of something more, of a life where the music that healed his heart might someday reach others. Then came the day that changed everything. At 16, his parents saved up what little they could and bought him an old guitar for $50, a small miracle in a family where every dollar had to stretch. The strings buzzed, the wood was worn, but when Alan held it for the first time, he felt something shift. It wasn't just an instrument, he later said. It was a way out, a way forward. Night after night, he played until his fingers bled. He wrote songs no one else could hear, about small-town roads, his mother's prayers, and dreams that felt too far to touch. In that little shed where storms rattled the windows, he began to find his voice. Neighbors would sometimes hear faint melodies drifting into the humid Georgia night. A young man singing to himself, shaping words into hope. He didn't know it then, but those late-night songs were the beginning of something extraordinary. Because that wooden shed wasn't just a home, it was a forge. And inside it, a boy from nowhere was learning how to turn hardship into harmony, pain into poetry, and faith into the kind of music that would one day carry America's heart. What started as a whisper in the dark would soon echo across the world. No one in that tiny house could have imagined the boy who strummed in silence would one day sing for the world and still call that little shed home in his heart. The road to Nashville. By the time Alan Jackson turned 27, he had everything that couldn't be measured in money: faith, love, and a dream that refused to die. But dreams alone couldn't fill a gas tank. So in 1985, with his 25-year-old wife Denise by his side, Alan packed their entire life into a rattling U-Haul trailer and drove away from the red clay roads of Noonan, Georgia, toward the city that could make or break them, Nashville. There were no guarantees waiting at the end of that highway. No job offers, no record deals, no promises. Just a second-hand guitar, a cardboard box of handwritten lyrics, and a prayer whispered from the driver's seat. Denise watched the skyline fade behind them and asked, "What if we don't make it?" Alan smiled faintly. "Then we'll make something else." Their first apartment in Nashville was barely a home. One flickering bulb, paper-thin walls, and rent that always came late. The kitchen was too small for two, and supper was often whatever they could stretch together: canned beans, cold biscuits, instant coffee. While Denise worked double shifts as a flight attendant to keep them afloat, Alan took any job he could find: selling used cars, hauling lumber, fixing furniture, hammering nails for a few extra dollars. The hands that dreamed of playing guitar now bore the calluses of survival. At night, when the noise of the city faded, Alan would sit on the edge of their bed, guitar in hand, staring out at the faint glow of downtown. Somewhere out there, someone was singing in a honky-tonk, living the life he longed for. So he played softly, the sound of hope echoing through cracked apartment walls. He wrote songs about love, loss, and the beauty of small-town life. Songs no one had asked for yet, but ones the world didn't know it needed. Every morning, he mailed demo tapes to record labels around town. Some came back unopened. Others returned with polite rejections. "We're looking for something different." Each envelope carried a little less hope, but he refused to stop sending them. "One more day," he'd whisper to himself. "Just hold on one more day." Then came the winter of 1986, the hardest of their lives. The heater died, and the walls turned to ice. Alan wore 2 shirts to bed and sang just to stay warm. During the day, he sorted mail at the Nashville network, delivering fan letters to country stars whose songs already filled the airwaves. He'd touch each envelope and think, "This is what hope feels like." And then, fate intervened in the quietest way. One afternoon, while working a flight, Denise spotted a familiar face: country legend Glenn Campbell. Most people would have asked for an autograph. Denise didn't. She told him about her husband, the man with calloused hands and a dream too stubborn to quit. Glenn listened, smiled, and handed her a business card. That single act of kindness cracked open the door to everything that would follow. Because sometimes, faith doesn't roar. It whispers and waits for someone brave enough to answer. No one in that tiny house could have imagined the boy who strummed in silence would one day sing for the world and still call that little shed home in his heart. Faith, fame, and the fire that tested love. By the end of the 1980s, Alan Jackson's story had begun to sound like one of his own songs. Hard beginnings, small miracles, and a chorus that rose when everyone thought it was over. When Arista Nashville took a chance on him in 1989, he didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. He went home, ran his hand across the old guitar his father once bought him, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for one more day." That quiet prayer would carry him through everything that came next. The glory, the exhaustion, and the heartbreak fame never warns you about. His first single, Blue-Blooded Woman, barely made a dent on the charts. But then came Here in the Real World, and suddenly, America heard him. His voice wasn't polished. It was pure. It sounded like home, like front porches, hard work, and honesty. His songs weren't written for fame. They were written for people who still believed that love, loss, and faith were the real riches of life. By 1992, A Lot About Livin' and A Little About Love turned him into a household name. Chattahoochee shot through the airwaves, winning CMA's Song and Single of the Year and selling over 6 million copies. That image of Alan grinning on water skis in jeans became an American symbol of simple joy. But behind the joy, the weight of success began to press harder. The tours were endless, over 200 nights a year. The bright lights never dimmed, and the crowds never stopped cheering. Alan smiled through fevers, sang through exhaustion, and slept sitting up on tour buses, rattling through the night. "Sometimes I'd walk off stage," he admitted later, "and the silence afterward was louder than the applause." Fame had found him, but peace was slipping away. The music industry, too, was changing. Pop country began to flood the charts, filled with shiny hooks and radio formulas. Labels pushed him to modernize, to chase the sound that sold. But Alan refused. "I just want to make music that sounds like where I came from," he said. It wasn't rebellion. It was loyalty to his roots, his faith, and his truth. That decision cost him dearly. He walked away from his management team, lost nearly $3 million in contracts, and risked his career. But what he gained was freedom, the right to sing his own kind of truth. In 1994, Who I Am silenced every doubt. 4 #1 singles, 4 million copies sold. A man who proved that integrity could still top the charts. But fame has a way of burning even those who handle it carefully. By 1998, exhaustion had carved deep into him. His songs grew darker, his voice quieter. "My hands used to shake so bad, I could barely tune my guitar," he confessed. You start wondering if you're chasing the dream, or if it's chasing you. And as the spotlight burned brighter, his marriage to Denise began to flicker. The same woman who had lifted him to the top now watched him drift further away, swallowed by success. He was gone more than he was home. Nights blurred into years. Distance turned into silence. Fame had given him everything, except the time to love the person who helped him get there. Then, in the middle of the chaos, September of 2001 changed everything. In that moment of national grief, Alan woke before dawn and wrote "Where Were You?" When the world stopped turning. A song that captured what an entire country couldn't put into words. When he performed it at the CMA Awards, there were no pyrotechnics, no flash, just one man, one guitar, and pure truth. It earned him Grammys, CMAs, and America's gratitude. But more than that, it reminded him why he began singing in the first place. Fame had tested him. Faith had steadied him. But love, that would be the next battle. One that no amount of applause could drown out. Alan once said, "Every song I've ever written came from something I almost lost." He didn't know how true that would become. Loss, legacy, and love that endures. Every legend eventually meets a silence that even applause can't fill. For Alan Jackson, that silence came not from fading fame, but from the losses that crept into the spaces between songs. The man who once carried America through its heartaches now faced his own, quiet, personal, and unrelenting. The first loss came in 2000, when Alan's father, Joseph Daddy Gene Jackson passed away. He was the quiet strength behind every lyric Alan ever wrote. A man who spoke little but loved deeply. Years earlier, Daddy Gene had reached into the family's thin savings to buy Alan his first guitar, $50 worth of wood that changed their lives. Even after Alan became a star, his father never bragged. He stayed in Georgia, listening to his son's voice on the radio. When Alan sang about work, faith, and family, it was his father's life he was honoring. So when he died, the silence hit hard. Alan returned to that same small church where he sang as a boy. No cameras, no crowds, just a son saying goodbye. That night, he picked up his old guitar and wrote Drive for Daddy Gene, a song about steering an old truck and learning how to live. It wasn't just a song, Alan said. It was a way to keep him close. 17 years later came another heartbreak. In 2017, his mother, Ruth Jackson, passed away. Ruth had been the heart of their family, a cafeteria worker with a voice full of hymns and a faith that never wavered. She taught Alan to pray before every show and reminded him that humility mattered more than fame. When she died, Alan said, "It felt like the sound of home was gone." In her memory, he recorded Precious Memories, a gospel album that began as a private tribute, but became one of his most beloved works, comforting millions who knew that same kind of loss. "Mama didn't care about awards," he said softly. "She just wanted me to sing with truth." But nothing could prepare him for what came next. In 2018, tragedy struck again when his son-in-law, Ben Seligman, married to his daughter Mattie, died suddenly at just 28. The couple had been married less than a year. "We were supposed to have a lifetime," Mattie later wrote. "But all I got was a chapter." Alan and Denise stood by her side. But even for a man who'd written songs about every kind of sorrow, this pain was beyond words. For months, Alan couldn't touch his guitar. "There are some songs," he said, "you just can't sing your way through." Yet from that darkness, love found a way forward. Mattie wrote Lemons on Friday, a memoir of loss and faith that inspired thousands. Alan penned the foreword himself, his words trembling with a father's love. "Grief never goes away," he wrote, "it just changes shape." Through every loss, his father, his mother, his son-in-law, Alan found his way back to the same truth, born in that Georgia shed. Faith and love endure. Fame fades. Awards gather dust. But the music born from love never dies. Just when the pain seemed to quiet, a new storm was already forming, one that wouldn't take someone he loved, but something he lived for. The diagnosis and the farewell. After a lifetime of storms, Alan Jackson thought he'd faced every kind of pain a man could bear. He had buried his parents, grieved with his daughter, and pushed through years of exhaustion on the road. But nothing prepared him for the battle that would come from within, a slow, invisible fight that no fame or faith could outsing. It began quietly, a stumble on stage, a tremor in his leg, a hesitation he blamed on fatigue. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The diagnosis came like thunder on a clear day. Charcot-Marie tooth disease, a rare hereditary nerve disorder that weakens muscles and steals balance and coordination. It was the same illness that had affected his father and sister, but now it had found him. There was no cure, only time. "It's been affecting me for 10 years, he said softly in a 2021 interview, "and it's getting worse. But I'm blessed. I can still sing." His voice didn't shake from fear, but from truth. The man who had stood tall through every loss now faced the hardest test, watching his own body betray him. At first, he hid it. He leaned on microphone stands, held his guitar tighter, moved slower. Fans began to notice, but he never stopped performing. "It's not weakness," he said. "It's just me learning to stand differently." Each show became an act of courage, a quiet rebellion against what was coming. He sang through pain, through tremors, through tears, and when the lights hit his face, for those 2 hours, he wasn't a man fighting disease. He was still Alan Jackson, the voice of faith, love, and every broken soul that ever found strength in a song. When he finally shared his diagnosis, he did it the only way he knew how, with honesty. "My fans have been with me through everything," he said. "They deserve to know. No dramatics, no pity, just quiet grace." Beside him stood Denise, the woman who'd seen him through every storm. Her hand rested on his arm, steadying him when his legs wavered. "He's my hero," she said later. "He keeps going even when it hurts." In 2022, Alan announced his final tour, Last Call, One More for the Road. It broke hearts across the country. But he didn't call it goodbye. "This isn't the end," he smiled. "It's just a thank you." Each show became a love letter to his fans, his family, and the God who carried him this far. Crowds rose when he walked on stage, slower now but still smiling. When he sang Remember When, his voice cracked, and the audience joined in, thousands lifting him when his legs couldn't. Now in his 70s, Alan lives quietly in Franklin, Tennessee, surrounded by family, faith, and peace. His illness may have slowed his steps, but not his soul. "I might not dance on stage anymore," he said softly, "but I'll keep singing till the last note God lets me." Maybe that's his legacy, not fame, not awards, but the grace of a man who faced the fire and kept singing through it. Alan Jackson's voice carried generations through heartbreak, hope, and healing. From a Georgia shed to the Grand Ole Opry, his journey wasn't about fame. It was about faith. As illness slows his steps, his words grow even louder. "It's not how long you stand, but how you stand when it hurts." If his story moved you, share your favorite Alan Jackson memory in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and watch the next video to keep his music alive. Because legends don't fade. They keep playing in the hearts that remember them.